I think most of you know who I am. For those of you who don't, my name is Daniel. So this is the Computer Security Basics Tech Talk. What I'd like to do today is provide you with a set of basic tools you can use right away to prevent yourself from being hacked or having your account or computer compromised. What I want to do that's a little different today from other computer security videos or talks that you may have attended is give you some background about how hackers operate, what our motivations are for recommending certain practices so that you understand why these practices work and how they prevent you from having your account compromised. So some topics we'll go over today. I'm going to start with a short background section. This will lay some foundations for us to use in the later sections where I go over some recommendations on how you can keep your account safe. So part of that background is what hackers are looking for when they're trying to compromise your computer or accounts, a definition of botnets. I don't feel this is covered enough in traditional computer security talks. So we'll cover what that is and how that relates to you. And we'll also take a look at the Target credit card leak, which I think holds some interesting lessons about how the average person can become involved in a security breach. Some of the tools I'll be talking about today will include best practices for managing and selecting your passwords, identifying phishing emails. Phishing emails have changed a little bit in the last 2 years, so I want to bring your attention to what this new variety of phishing emails look like and how to prevent yourself from falling for those emails. We'll also go over screen locking, fairly simple concept, but something that I feel was definitely worth mentioning. And we'll talk about some precautions about traveling internationally. Let's start with the background. A common myth I hear from a lot of people is they don't have anything a hacker wants. So let's start by asking yourself a couple of questions in your head. You can answer them in your head, don't have to answer them out loud. First of all, you want to ask yourself if you have any money. I'm hoping the answer is yes, but it's okay if you say no. Do you have any friends? Does your job require you to interact with other people? At this point, I'm hoping you said yes to at least one of these three questions, but if you manage to make it this far by saying no to every one of them, you should have an answer to this last question, yes. Do you have a computer or mobile device? And if that's the case, then you are valuable to a hacker in some way. So what are hackers looking for? The obvious one is money. Most people are familiar with news reports about hackers that are making money from their exploits. They're either looking for credit card or debit card numbers, looking for access to your PayPal or Amazon accounts. Information is another big one. If you're involved in either controversial or confidential work, that's valuable to a hacker. Certain hackers with an agenda may want to release that information publicly to damage your reputation or either sell that information off to someone who's willing to buy it. What's unique to Stanford, too, is the research we conduct here is also valuable to hackers. Now, many of you aren't related or directly involved in research, but your relationship with researchers or researching departments is also valuable to a hacker. And lastly, your mere presence on a computer network or Stanford's computer network is also valuable. So maybe you don't have any information that's directly valuable to them, but your relationship to other computers on that network is valuable to a hacker. And lastly, just mere computing power. If you have a computer, the hacker can leverage that to further his own goals, and he can do this in a variety of ways. Normally, he'll infect your computer and join it to what's called a botnet, and we'll discuss what that is right now. So what is a botnet? It's simply a collection of computers that a hacker has control over. How do they control this? They infect your computer with either malware or viruses from infected websites or emails. Once you are infected, that joins your computer to the hacker's network, and then they can take control of it to do a variety of things. The most common uses are to send spam emails. So most of these spam emails, the spammers aren't sitting at a computer sending out thousands of messages at a time. What they've ended up doing is they've controlled a botnet of computers to send emails on their behalf, infected computers. And the second thing they can do is perform a distributed denial of service attack. This is simply the control of this botnet or this collection of infected computers to overwhelm the website so that it becomes unavailable. So one common example, I think in the last few years, Anonymous was famous for performing a number of these attacks. So if there was a banking institution they had something against, they would control a botnet to overwhelm the site so people could not access the website. So this brings us to the 2013 hacking incident where Target leaked a number of credit cards. In fact, a number is kind of an overstatement. In December 2013, they revealed that up to 40 million credit and debit card numbers were leaked from their servers. This is interesting because it's considered to be the largest credit card leak in American history. But what I think is more interesting is how the leak began. While the leak is still under investigation, investigators agree that it began with an external refrigeration vendor's account. So this vendor was not related in any way, direct way, to the credit card database, yet they were able to leverage this person's account to get access to the credit card numbers. What probably happened is once that account was leaked, they could take a look at how that account was connected to other systems and leverage the weaknesses in those systems to get to their final destination. As a simple illustration of how this works, we can kind of consider the circle as Target's network. The hackers know that there is something they want inside, a credit card number, for example, but they don't know how to get in. So they'll test their defenses, Target's defenses. What the investigators had found was leading up to the attack, the phishers had sent out emails indiscriminately to a number of vendors associated with Target. So they might try some sort of shipping company that works with Target, find out that that leads nowhere. Their next attempt might be maybe some sort of supplier connected to Target. This probably doesn't lead anywhere either. Maybe some Target employees, maybe they can compromise their accounts, but that doesn't lead anywhere interesting. And finally, they reach the refrigeration vendor, find out they were able to compromise an account, and it does lead somewhere interesting, to have an interesting connection or weakness into the network, and they can take advantage of that to get inside, see where they can infect next or compromise next, and so forth, until they finally reach their end goal, which is the credit card numbers. So even if you're not directly related to the processing or storage of credit card numbers, your relationships with others are valuable as a stepping stone to reach that end goal. So that's the end of the background section. What I really hope you take away from this is that your account and computer are more valuable than you think. Whether it's money, information that you have directly related to your work or related to others' work, or even information about your relationship to other computers on the network, and even just your computer itself can be used to send phishing emails or perform attacks on other websites. So let's talk about some tools you can use to prevent your account or computer from getting compromised. Again, some of those things we can do are to maintain our passwords well, be aware of phishing emails, locking our screens, and taking some certain precautions while traveling internationally. So regarding passwords, this is simple, but worth bearing in mind as we continue through this section. What is a password? And that's simply a key to your account, but it has some interesting qualities in that it's really easy to forge this key, and you're forced to make your own key, which is a bit silly. If somebody were to sell you a car and then inform you shortly after that you're responsible for making your own key, you might look at them silly and say, what on earth are you talking about? But for computer accounts, that's actually what you have to do. You have to make your own key, decide how strong it's going to be, how easy it's going to be to remember. And hopefully in this section, we'll clear some confusion about what works, what doesn't, and what you can do to choose a good password. This comic here has a lot going on, but I'll summarize it for you. In the past, we made these recommendations in this top row where your password had to have a number of letters and characters and uppercase and lowercase letters. And if your password was short, especially if it was short, it's really hard to remember this password, and it turns out it's actually extraordinarily easy for a computer to guess what your password is. What we found recently is if you actually use a simple technique like the bottom where you use a passphrase or a collection of words that form a single password, even if you keep it this simple, it's actually harder for a computer to guess this password, and it's really substantially easier to remember this style of password. Some basic recommendations for your password are to choose a strong password. What does that mean? It'll probably be long, and it'll contain multiple dictionary words, hopefully uncommon words. You only use one password per site or account. That prevents, or that minimizes the damage to yourself if one of your passwords is compromised. And you'll change your passwords regularly. Notice that I don't say frequently, so don't expect to change your passwords once every few days, every week, but if you make a habit of changing them every half year or year, it should be in good shape. So let's talk about what it's like to think like a hacker. If you've ever seen headlines like this in the past year where Facebook or LinkedIn lost a bunch of passwords, you might be wondering, well, what does this password look like? They're not written out in plain text for everyone to see. What they're actually stored as, they're stored as something called password hash, which is just a scrambled version of the password. So hackers will find a way to get this file. They'll look at these scrambled passwords and say, well, what do I do next? And if you can guess the method that was used to scramble these passwords, you can get the password. So if it's scrambled one way, you run some math on it. If you know the same way that Facebook was scrambling these passwords, and if the scrambled version that you try matches their scrambled version, you have a good guess at what that password is. Granted, it takes a lot of work to scramble passwords or guess passwords. You might imagine some strategies are to guess, personal information or guess, common phrases the person's used in the past. But if you exhaust all those possibilities, you might get stuck, which is where computers come into play. Computers have the advantage of being able to try a lot of passwords for us automatically. One method they can use is to brute force guess a password. So they'll just try every single possible combination of password they can think of until they finally get your password. Very tedious for a human, very, very simple for a computer to do. To speed this process up, as you might guess, this takes a lot of time to do, so they can use something called a rainbow table. And this is just a collection of common words or phrases that people are known to use in their passwords, especially given the frequency of password leaks in the past years. Hackers have a better idea of what people are using for their passwords and common patterns they use. Some of these include just single dictionary words, names. People tend to use names in their passwords. And certain sequences have become very common, such as 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E, F, A, A, A. And one last thing to note is hackers have time on their side. They have a scrambled version of the password. They may not know what it is, but they have a lot of time to figure it out. Let's take a break. I want to show you this video card here. I'm fond of video games, so if you all would like to pitch in a little bit of money to show your appreciation of my tech talk so far, I greatly appreciate that at the end. But what I'm actually showing this here is not at all about video games. It is a graphics card. It is used for video games normally, but it's also used for password cracking. Does anybody have any idea how much something like this might cost? So it costs $411, which is a little bit expensive, but to put that in perspective, that's about the cost of an iPad 2, a little more expensive. And for that cost, you can get a fair number of passwords, which will lead you to bank accounts and other financial information that will make the investment well worth it. This particular card was shown to make 8.2 billion password guesses per second. Wow. Which sounds like a lot, but the more skeptical of you out there might say, okay, 8.2 billion is a lot. What does that mean in terms of passwords? There's tons of passwords out there, right? If you have 8-character lowercase password, there's only 209 billion possible passwords. If you start mixing your cases, adding upper and lowercase, that brings the possible combinations to 59 trillion, which is much better than 209 billion, but still not looking too good. If you use the rainbow table method, just guessing common words or password combinations, a common table might have 60 million words. And if your password happens to fall in that table, then you're looking in pretty bad shape. So this is all looking pretty grim, but I do have some good news. In the next few charts, I want to show you some changes we can make to improve your password security. One of the recommendations I had made earlier was to keep your passwords long. As you can see, so on this chart, I've showed the characters in the password against my estimate of the maximum time to crack this password, given the video card in the past slide. So we can see here on an 8-character password, it's going to take well under a minute to crack that password if it has to try every single guess to get to your password. If you add an extra character, we increase that to 11 minutes. By 10 characters, we are at 280 minutes, and so forth until we reach 12 characters, where it'll take a maximum of 190,000 minutes to crack. In days, that's 134 days. So we're looking okay, but like I said before, hackers have a lot of time on their hands, so they can afford to leave a computer running for 100 awesome days guessing your password, and that's no problem. The good news is past 12 characters, each extra character you add increases the maximum time to crack that password substantially. So instead of a couple of 100 days, we're looking at years and, months and years to crack that password. The second recommendation I had also made was to use passphrases or multiple words together in a single password. If a hacker were to only guess single dictionary words as a password instead of trying to brute force guess, they'll say, okay, let's get smart, let's guess single words or common combinations. It would probably take well under an hour, probably even well under a minute to guess that password. If you stick 2 words together, like in the middle here, apple frosting, we've increased that to about 122 hours. But again, that's not looking so good. That's a couple of days. But it gets interesting when you add a third word in there. It's going to take a maximum estimated 439 quadrillion hours to get. So we're in pretty good shape, 439 quadrillion. But keep in mind that's a maximum. So there's a couple of other things you want to keep in mind here. But if they have to make every single guess, they'll have passed away long before they'll be able to figure out your password.
Wait, you'll die or they'll die?
Oh, they'll die, or probably both of us.
One question I have. Having to do with, they're trying these passwords, but how many times can you try a password?
Oh, so this goes back to the password hashes. So normally what happens is the hacker will exploit some weakness in a website. So they're not going to the login page and logging in multiple times. What they do is they find the weakness in the website to get this list of passwords. But once they get the list of passwords, the passwords are scrambled in what I called was a password hash. So they have to make some guesses as to what this is. So once they have the file, they can make unlimited guesses, but they have to know a couple of things, like how was the password scrambled, and what are some common patterns you might use to make your password. So instead of trying to log in repeatedly to a website, what they do is after they've somehow managed to get the scrambled list of passwords, they can make an unlimited number of guesses towards your password.
And how will they know, where did they get their basically the answer? Like for instance, I go to my bank. If I log in so many times, if I try and I don't get the password after 6 tries, that's the end of it.
Okay. I can go over in detail towards the end of the talk because this is a little more in depth. But so if you're interested, I can go over that. But does the rest of it make sense so far? That
Yeah.
Okay. So to review these recommendations, you'll want to choose a strong password, and as we've demonstrated, a strong password is something that's both long and incorporates multiple words. You want to use one password per site or account, and you want to change your passwords regularly. So some tips for choosing a strong password. At minimum, it should be at least 16 characters long, and it should include mixed case characters. So this is consistent with ITS's recommendations. You may have received an email recently from ITS saying that they're going to change their password requirements. So this recommendation fits in line with them. I feel that 16 characters long in mixed case, especially if you're using a passphrase, should be fairly easy to remember and sufficiently strong. And it's also in line with what ITS recommends. It's also nice if you can remember to add numbers and symbols. Not required, but if it's within your ability to add those in there, it certainly doesn't hurt. It'll help out. And of course, choose a passphrase for ease of recall. So simply, instead of using a dictionary word or some random string that doesn't make sense to you, choose a couple of uncommon words you can stick together. In my case, I happen to like cats and berries and beaches, so I've chosen the password Siamese raspberry waves. You'll notice I've added some uppercase letters here as well. Some other techniques are to abbreviate or kind of summarize quotes or song lyrics that are important to you, maybe religious phrases, whatever is important to you, you can use as well, as long as you make some changes that make it unique to yourself. On the other side then, I want to look at some weak passwords or characteristics of weak passwords which you definitely want to avoid. Where you can avoid 8-character passwords, I think I've shown clearly here that an 8-character password is almost the same as having no password at all. Avoid the use of direct use of personal info. So try not to use pet names, your own name, or family members' names, and direct mention of hobbies or interests. If a hacker has a particular interest in you, then the first thing they'll do is scrape your social media sites, any blog posts you've made, any presence you have on the internet will be used against you to guess your password. And avoid, of course, single dictionary words. Your password shouldn't be something like apple or unicorn or balloon, because that'll be fairly easy to guess. And of course, guess repeating characters. This is important to note too. I know for certain sites you're required to have a minimum password length, and if you can't think of a password, the temptation is to fill in the rest of that password with something like 12345 99999. But hackers have caught on to this, and these combinations are very common variations that they'll try to guess your password. So a very bad password, for example, would be John12345678890. It does meet, it is over 8 characters, but it uses, somebody's name in a very common sequence that it'll be one of the first things a hacker will try to guess. So now we've gone over how to choose a strong password. Here are some tips about how to manage your passwords. Of course, you want to change it regularly, so make sure you have a method for keeping track of when to change your passwords. I'd recommend about once every 6 months. This means if you hear, maybe the day you change your password, you hear in the news that LinkedIn, for example, is leaked, you just change your LinkedIn password. If you change it again, the hacker will, of course, have the leaked password that they're guessing. It might take them months to guess, but if you changed it, by the time they guess it, then that password is no longer valid. And then, of course, if you need help, this is kind of contrary to what you typically hear, but if you need help remembering, use a sheet of paper, but obviously don't write the entire password down, so just enough to get your memory going. Don't link that password to any account in an obvious way, and keep it somewhere safe. So don't post it in plain sight. Keep it somewhere like your wallet or in a locked cabinet. Refer to it only when you need to. So here I've got an example of a sheet I use to remind myself when to change my passwords. I've got the list of the services I use, when I last changed my password, and when that password expires. Every month I might check in and say, okay, looks like it's time to change these passwords. I'll make sure to do that. Make it a habit to check into that every month. And then a sample sheet here of a password reminder sheet. I'm not writing the entire password out. I keep it small enough to keep with me in my wallet, and notice that there's no mention of what these passwords go to. I should know that certain passwords go to a particular service, so if I lose that piece of paper, it's not obvious what somebody should be using these passwords for. So this concludes our probably our biggest section here on password best practices, how to choose a strong key for your account. But there's some other methods to acquire or compromise your accounts. One of the clever things hackers can do is phishing. Most of you are familiar with this. And the goal here is if they can get you to give up your password information, that's a lot easier than guessing your password, even if they have a computer to aid them. Most of us are familiar with the African royalty email scam. It's really old. We roll our eyes when we see one. We kind of have a chuckle when we get one, and we're like, okay, who's going to fall for that? And hackers have kind of got wind of this. This method doesn't work anymore. We chuckle at it, and nobody falls for it. So what they've done is shifted tactics. A lot of phishing emails now have some sort of threat instead of a reward. So instead of trying to reward you tens of millions of dollars for sending out a MoneyGram, they'll say, you might be fined if you fail to comply with this action. You might lose your account if you don't perform certain actions. And instead of getting you to send money or respond to an email, most of these attacks involve some sort of fake login page. So these newer forms of phishing attacks typically involve someone impersonating someone in a position of authority. And they'll send these emails out to you using the botnets I had mentioned before. And typically the email will threaten something obvious, like a legal action or fine. So around tax time, you might see a couple of fake IRS emails saying if you don't update your social security number or birth date, you may face a large fine for failing to file your taxes correctly. Maybe it's a little less severe, but still important. Maybe you have a fake email from what's supposedly the IT team saying, if you don't confirm your address or your account information, you may have your account disabled for inactivity. And sometimes the threats are a little more subtle. So you might receive something from FedEx or UPS saying, we need your newest account information. And there's nothing threatening in there in itself, but you might fill in the blanks and say, well, if they don't have my newest account information, how are they supposed to ship my packages to me? You might be tempted to click that link and see that your account information is up to date. So you'll normally click the link to respond to the email. If you click the link, it'll lead to a login page that can look like a fairly convincing duplicate of the actual login page for that service. And at that point, when you've updated your information, what you've actually done is provided your credentials to the hacker so they can use that to compromise your account. The short-term goal, obviously, is always your account information, but they can use that to try to get money from you or simply to try to launch a more complex attack. So in the target case I discussed, the phishing information wasn't directly, the attackers weren't directly interested in that person's money, but that person's account had interesting information about his relationship to the network that got them to the end goal, which was the credit card numbers. So I don't know if any of you have picked up the handouts when you came in. This is there's a hopefully larger version of this on the back where we can take a look at this. But let's take about a minute to take a look at this message. And I want to see what you all think is a little strange about this message, if anything. We'll give it a couple of seconds and we'll take a vote about what people think is off about this message. Okay, do we have any guesses? The grammar definitely is kind of strange. Is there anything else that we noticed is kind of peculiar about this message? Yes, yeah, so they were trying to ask you to update your information via email as well. Overall, though, this is a little strange because besides the strange grammar, on the whole, we can't really point to specifics about what's wrong. It has a fairly convincing FedEx logo. It even comes from a FedEx website, or sorry, FedEx email address. And if you would have clicked the links on the top, those would have actually led you to FedEx pages. What I couldn't demonstrate here, which was interesting about this particular email, is even though the links on the top led to FedEx pages, this particular link that it wanted you to click on did not. What it did was lead you to a convincing forgery of the FedEx login page, but if you look carefully, it's not actually on the FedEx site. This page is actually on something called savevisual.org. So if you hover over a link, it'll show you a tooltip, and this applies to web browsers and Outlook alike. If you hover over it, it'll show you where this link actually leads, and it's something you should be doing as you're looking at links to make sure, is this really going where I think it's going? In this case, it obviously isn't, but sometimes it's a little more subtle. Let's take a look at this login page. Last summer, Stanford was hit by a fairly convincing, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna make the comment that in the to field, it said recipients.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, that is a little weird too, because you'd think if they were going to ask you to change your information, they'd be a little more direct or explicit about who that would be addressed to. So last summer, Stanford was hit by a fairly large phishing attack, and part of this attack involved a fake web-auth page. I've got a copy of this page here for you to examine. Let's take a couple of seconds to look at it and see if anybody can spot what's wrong with this page. Do we have any guesses? That's correct. So the address here isn't correct, and what they've done is they've kind of they've taken advantage of this infected website. So they've infected something called cheapdeals.deals.info or cheappills.deals.info, and they've infected this website and taken advantage of this website to create this fake web page that holds this fake login or access page for you to give your credentials over to the hacker. What was particularly interesting about this attack is they faked this subdomain at the beginning, secure.stanford.edu. So most people who read the first part of the address stop there, say, okay, this is legitimate, and don't continue. Typically, if you're not sure about a particular email, so this is kind of scary because it looks fairly convincing, but the good news is that they were only able to do this in an email, so they couldn't infect one of our sites and change the URL to something else. They could only perform this trick by including it in an email and then hoping that you click on that email and not notice the site, which brings me to my next point, that if you're not comfortable with a link in the email, don't click it. Use other methods you already know to get to that site. So if Stanford is asking you to update your access information, but you don't know if this is a real or fake request, instead of clicking on the link, just simply go to access.stanford.edu and update your information there. And of course, if you're still not sure, you can always ask one of us in IT, Jonathan, Harry, or I, and we'll be glad to take a look at that web page or email and let you know what we think of it. So we've talked about how to select a strong password or key to your account, and we've also talked about how phishers can get you to inadvertently give up your login information. The next thing I want to talk about is screen locking or unauthorized physical access. So who sees what's wrong with this picture here?
Take it off and walk away.
Yeah. So you can see here this person hasn't been very smart about using their lock. And similarly, physical access is simply the most basic aspect of physical security. And what do I mean by physical access? I mean the ability for a person to walk up to your computer or iPhone or iPad and use it. We can prevent people from using it while we're away by locking our screens. And of course, a lock is useless if you don't use it. If you're not going to lock your screens while you're away, that opens it up for somebody to use in the next 15 minutes or so while we're waiting for it to lock automatically. On an iPhone, this is pretty simple. I don't know how many of you are using personal iPhones, but if you are, be sure to set a PIN on your phone. And for those of you who have Stanford provided iPhones, this is done automatically, so you shouldn't have to choose one. It's already provided to you. And then, of course, you can just tap the power button at the top to lock. It should lock on its own in five minutes, but if you know you're not going to be using it, and again, just tap the power button at the top. That'll lock your phone. For Windows computers, this is simply a matter of pressing the Windows key on your keyboard and L at the same time. That will lock your computer automatically. And I recommend doing this if you know you're definitely going to be away from your computer longer than 15 minutes. While your computer should lock itself in 15 minutes automatically, you don't want to, it's a little uncomfortable to leave your computer unlocked that long, especially if you know you're not returning to it, because you don't know who's going to be passing by your desk during that time and who might be wanting to access your computer in that time as well. So this brings me to our last topic here is international travel. In the LBR All Hands meeting last year, Amy Woodbury had mentioned some precautions to take for international travel, and I think it's worth mentioning again here. Using your computer in general in a public area is a little tricky, and that's no less different for international travel, because you don't know who else is on that network with you and what they're doing on that network. Maybe they're monitoring your traffic, maybe they're looking for weaknesses on your laptop, you don't know. Some of the high-risk countries that have been identified by ITS include some obvious ones like China and Russia, but you may be surprised to find there's countries as well like Mexico and Israel that are also on that list. If you find that you're going to be traveling to a high-risk location, we can provide an iPad loaner for you for basic internet and email access. And what this will do is it'll minimize the amount of data you take with you abroad. One example is you're taking pictures of a project that should only stay within Stanford. If you lose that iPad on your travels, or if it somehow gets infected, then you don't lose that data. You're not at risk for losing that data. And the best part, of course, is that these loaners are free. So how do you prepare for your travels? First, inform your local IT person that you're going to be traveling, and we can work with ITS to determine if your destinations are risky or are part of that high-risk list. If they are, we can arrange a loaner for you. We just ask that you provide us 2 weeks' notice to work with ITS to determine whether or not your travel destinations are risky and to arrange and set up a loaner for you. Thanks for sticking with me so far with the presentation. We're now at its conclusion. What I want to review here are the practices we had gone over. When you're choosing a password, be sure to choose a long password, and be sure to use a passphrase to make it not only easier to remember, but more difficult to crack. If you're going to use multiple dictionary words, as I demonstrated, shoot for 3 or more words in your passphrase. For phishing, if you see an email that's kind of threatening, don't feel obliged to act on it right away. Stop and look through it. See, does this email make sense? Why am I receiving this email? Is this coming from who I really think it does? And of course, if you're not sure, feel free to ask IT, and we'll be happy to look at that email for you to determine whether or not it's real or fake. Regarding unauthorized access to your devices, make sure to lock your screens when you're not using them, because you don't know who is going to be near your devices when you're away from them. And for international travel, report your travel plans to IT 2 weeks in advance, especially if you're leaving out of the country, so we can make the appropriate arrangements for you. What I hope you take away from this talk is that everybody is valuable in some way to a hacker, whether it's the money you possess, information you might have about confidential or controversial projects, or even your relationships to others or other computers. That's very valuable to a hacker. And lastly, of course, your computer itself, as part of a botnet, is extremely valuable for a hacker. While this might seem overwhelming, I hope that you understand I provided you some basic tools you can use right away to prevent your accounts from being compromised. So that brings us to our end. Anybody have any questions?
Is there, for international travel, is there a VPN service that, like, for any destination you can check?
Yes.
Or just like we can set up in the US and can always call back?
So there is a VPN that should be included as part of the loaner. Anybody now with a student ID should have access to the VPN with no extra setup required. So however you connect to your VPN normally on your iPhone, you should be able to turn that on and connect to your VPN.
The same internet.
Same student ID password.
I tried it on the iPhone.
If you're having some difficulty connecting, we can take a look at it and see if it's set up correctly. Oh, Diane, did you have a question?
Yeah. Are botnets detected by virus scan programs?
Yes. So normally virus scan programs should be able to detect the viruses that can join your computer to a botnet. So we do have that protection. Unfortunately, the virus scan program is only as good as their ability to know about them. So,
But that brings me to the XP thing. That was in
the talk. So yes, I can talk about that a little bit now here. At Windows 7, so at Stanford, XP shouldn't be an issue. We've replaced most of our computers with Windows 7 at this point. If you have Windows XP for home use, I highly recommend either upgrading to Windows 8 or getting a new computer, or considering if you don't have a particular need for the computer, just don't use it or bring it off the internet. Unfortunately, Windows XP is not receiving support anymore, so any more weaknesses they find. So a lot of the botnets, the viruses they use, they take advantage of weaknesses that people already know are in the operating system. And as Microsoft finds them, they release updates to deal with these weaknesses. Unfortunately, since XP is no longer supported, even if they find weaknesses, they won't release an update for it. So your computer is now vulnerable to new types of attacks that even if they can be detected, maybe there's nothing we can do about it because the weakness isn't patched. I think this is recently was discovered, I think just yesterday, that there was a new, I guess what they call a 0-day or like a bug that shipped with Internet Explorer right as it was released, and it affects every version of Internet Explorer, including versions on XP. But unfortunately, because Microsoft is no longer updating that software, it's going to remain open for attack until people stop using XP. Are there any other questions, or? All right, well, that should be it. One thing I do want to note is for everybody who's signed in, I'll be sending a survey about today's tech talk, so please expect that from me. I appreciate any thoughts you have about the tech talk. That's very valuable for us. All right, thank you.